In the darkest corners of the multiverse, where time bends and gods wage eternal wars, a rift tears open between realities. From the world of mystic arts, a sorcerer unlike any other steps through, Dr. Stephen Strange, master of the mystic arts. But this is not his universe. This is the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, a realm ruled by gods of chaos, endless suffering, and the cold light of the Emperor's dying will. As he enters this nightmare, Strange must face horrors that defy reason. Demons born of madness, warriors forged in faith, and an empire held together by fear. His magic, once the pinnacle of control and balance, now trembles before the raw power of the warp itself. Here even gods are prey, and even hope can be a sin. Can the Sorcerer Supreme survive a universe where the only truth is war? Can he understand the madness of the warp before it consumes him whole? This is what if Dr. Strange entered Warhammer 40K, a journey through power, corruption, and the price of understanding. Strange tried to explain, to convey that he meant no harm, but his words fell upon suspicion. The Imperium of Man knew only two kinds of psychers, those sanctioned by the Emperor and those marked for execution. To them, Strange's power was not a gift but a threat, a possible doorway for demonic corruption. The psyker raised his hand, summoning a psychic bolt. Strange deflected it with a shimmering shield, his reflexes honed by years of battle against magical forces far beyond human comprehension. The resulting shockwave threw dust and fire into the air. For a moment, silence. Then the soldiers opened fire. Strange weaved through the barrage of energy rounds, his cloak propelling him upward as golden glyphs flared around him. He chanted under his breath, conjuring illusions to disorient his attackers, but each spell came at a price. The warp twisted his magic unpredictably, causing unstable surges that nearly backfired. He realized he couldn't fight them without risking something worse, something watching from the shadows of the Immaterium. The psyker's eyes widened as Strange vanished into the smoke, reappearing behind him. With a swift motion, Strange immobilized the man in a cocoon of mystic energy. "We don't want to hurt you," he said, his tone both firm and weary. "But I need answers." The psyker struggled against the binding spell, his mind flaring with fear. You wield the power of the warp without the Emperor's blessing," he spat. "You are an abomination." Strange frowned, the words echoing in his mind. The Emperor. The name resonated through the warp like a distant thunderclap, an entity of immense psychic presence. Whoever this Emperor was, his influence reached across the stars. Strange could feel it like gravity pulling at his soul. He released the psyker and stepped back, the enormity of his situation settling in. He was not merely lost. He had fallen into a galaxy where faith had replaced reason, where magic was heresy, and where his very existence could spark a holy war. The cloak of levitation brushed against his shoulder as if urging him to move. Strange looked up at the burning horizon. In the distance, the sky shimmered unnaturally, like a wound in reality itself. He could sense the same energy that had brought him here, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. If he was to survive, he would need to understand this universe and its rulers before it consumed him entirely. The endless plains of the battlefield stretched before Dr. Strange as the storm of ash and smoke cleared around him. The clash with the soldiers of the Imperium had left him unsettled, not because of their weapons or power, but because of their unwavering faith in a cause they barely understood. Every gesture, every word they spoke was drenched in reverence for a distant godlike being known only as the Emperor. Strange could feel the psychic residue of that faith burning in the warp, like a lighthouse of blinding energy piercing through the darkness. The Sorcerer Supreme had fought demons, gods, and entities that thrived on belief, but never before had he seen an entire civilization built upon it so completely. He moved carefully, cloaking himself with a spell of invisibility, though the warp made his magic unstable. Every time he tried to bend it to his will, it twisted like a serpent, its chaotic nature threatening to break free. Yet he had little choice. His presence in this world was dangerous enough without announcing himself to the zealots who ruled it. In the distance, he saw the grand silhouette of a fortress city rising from the wasteland like a monolith. Its walls were engraved with images of angels wielding weapons, saints locked in eternal battle with monstrous forms, and inscriptions written in a language that resonated with psychic energy. Strange could feel the presence of hundreds of psychers within those walls. humans with varying degrees of mental attunement to the warp. They were like flickering candles in a storm, fragile yet burning fiercely in defiance of the darkness. Strange approached the city carefully, descending near a colossal gate guarded by massive figures clad in gold and black power armor. Their presence radiated disciplined aggression, their souls bound to duty and suspicion. Strange realized immediately that brute force would mean death, and so he whispered an incantation under his breath, his form shimmering into that of a weary traveler, his aura masked from psychic detection, at least for a time. Inside the city, he wandered through narrow streets where banners of the Imperium fluttered in the wind. The people were gaunt, their faces marked with scars, both physical and spiritual. They prayed at shrines built from metal and bone, chanting hymns that seemed to vibrate through the warp itself. It was as though every word of devotion was a shield against the ever-present corruption surrounding them. Strange observed quietly, sensing how this faith served not just as belief but as psychic armor. The entire population unknowingly reinforced a collective mental defense against the warp, channeling their devotion into psychic resistance. It fascinated him. An empire unknowingly sustaining its survival through faith-based psychic energy. But it also terrified him, because the same faith that protected them could easily turn them into weapons of zealotry against anything they deemed alien or impure. He was still absorbing the overwhelming presence of this civilization when a sharp psychic pulse cut through the air like a blade. A blade. He turned, instantly aware that someone had detected him. The illusion spell faltered, and before he could react, he found himself surrounded by a squad of soldiers bearing symbols of an inquisitorial seal. A stylized eye crowned with a skull. Their weapons were raised, their formation flawless. At their center stood a woman draped in black robes, her expression calm but her eyes burning with cold authority. She was an inquisitor, a member of one of the most feared organizations in the galaxy. Her mind radiated focus and suspicion, her psychic aura sharp and disciplined. "Your designation and allegiance," she said flatly. Strange tried to respond with honesty, explaining his origins and the anomaly that had brought him here. His voice carried sincerity, but in this world, truth was often mistaken for deception. The Inquisitor's expression didn't change. She signaled to her retinue, and Strange was disarmed, not that they could truly understand the nature of his artifacts. They placed psychic dampeners around him, metallic restraints infused with holy inscriptions meant to suppress sorcery. The sensation was suffocating. The eye of Agamotto dimmed, and the cloak of levitation fell limp, as though mourning the weight of faith crushing the air around them. Strange was taken through the fortress, through halls adorned with relics of countless wars and paintings depicting the Emperor as both god and man. He could feel the oppressive psychic field radiating from every wall, powered by the collective will of billions across the Imperium. The Inquisitor watched him closely, her eyes never leaving his face as if searching for the slightest sign of corruption. Eventually, Strange was brought into a chamber lined with ancient machinery and relics humming with arcane power. At its center stood a circle of psychers, their eyes closed, their minds linked through the warp. The Inquisitor gestured for him to step forward. "You claim to be a sorcerer from another realm," she said. "We shall see whether your words are lies or the whispers of demons." The psychers' chanting grew louder, the temperature dropping as their combined power formed a psychic web around Strange. He could feel them probing his mind, searching through layers of memory and consciousness. He resisted at first, instinctively drawing upon his own defenses, but realized that doing so would only confirm their fears. Instead, he allowed fragments of his truth to surface. His battle with Dormammu, his service to the Vishanti, his protection of Earth. The psychers recoiled slightly, confused by the alien nature of his magic. The Inquisitor frowned. "You are not of the warp," she muttered. "And yet, your power flows through it." Strange could tell she was struggling to reconcile what she saw. In this galaxy, every form of psychic energy was tied to the warp and thus inherently dangerous. His magic, though similar in energy, was structured, refined, and controlled through discipline and will. It was something their world could not comprehend. "You wield chaos with precision," she said finally, her voice low. "That makes you dangerous." Strange met her gaze calmly, sensing the weight of her conviction. "My control is the difference between order and destruction," he replied softly. "Without it, power is nothing." For the first time, her stern expression wavered. The Inquisitor dismissed her guards, choosing to speak with him alone. She asked about his universe, his gods, his purpose. Strange answered truthfully, though he knew his words would sound like heresy to someone who believed the Emperor was the sole light of humanity. Yet curiosity flickered in her eyes. In a galaxy consumed by war and superstition, knowledge was a forbidden treasure. Strange realized that he might have found his first fragile thread of understanding in this hostile reality. But he also knew that one wrong move, one misstep in this empire of zealots, could doom him to the same fate as countless others who had dared to challenge their faith. The Inquisitor led Dr. Strange through the labyrinthine corridors of the fortress, her pace brisk, her presence commanding silence from every guard and servant they passed. The flickering glow of sanctified candles cast long shadows over the Gothic architecture, where statues of the Emperor loomed in silent judgment, their stone eyes seeming to follow Strange with disapproval. Every step he took echoed like a challenge in this sanctum of devotion. He could feel the weight of psychic wards pressing against him, layers upon layers of protection designed to repel the taint of chaos and suppress any unholy power. To them, his very existence here was blasphemy, a being of unrecognized origin wielding power they could neither name nor control. Yet Strange remained calm, his mind focused, trying to sense the rhythm of this strange universe's magic, if it could be called that. The Inquisitor, whose name he had learned was Merithiel, brought him into a circular chamber dominated by a colossal mural of the Emperor, enthroned in radiant light. At the center of the room lay a psychic focus, a crystalline construct pulsing with faint golden energy. Strange recognized it as a conduit of immense mental power, a relic, perhaps, used to commune with the Emperor's psychic presence. As they approached, the atmosphere grew dense, almost electric. Strange could feel a consciousness in the air, vast and distant, stretching across time and space. The Emperor's psychic domain was unlike anything he had ever encountered. It wasn't merely power. It was faith made manifest, belief weaponized into something tangible and infinite. Merithiel turned to him, her expression grave. "You have entered the domain of the Emperor of mankind," she said. "Every psyker, every sanctioned soul that touches the warp owes their life to his protection. Your power does not belong here. The Emperor's light will judge its worth." She gestured to the relic and the crystal began to hum, threads of golden energy weaving around Strange like spectral chains. He felt them probing his soul, searching for corruption, for any hint of demonic influence. He didn't resist. To resist would only deepen their mistrust. But as the psychic current intertwined with his aura, something extraordinary happened. The Emperor's power and his magic collided in a silent storm. The energies were incompatible. The Emperor's psychic field was absolute, built on order, unity, and devotion, while Strange's mystic energy flowed with the chaos of possibility, rooted in knowledge and will rather than faith. The clash sent tremors through the chamber, and Strange winced as the eye of Agamotto flared to life, reacting instinctively to the foreign power pressing against it. Merithiel's eyes widened as she felt the backlash ripple through her psychic senses. For a brief instant, she glimpsed the infinity within Strange's soul, the countless dimensions, the echoes of gods and demons he had faced, and the endless planes of magic beyond human comprehension. The Emperor's psychic essence recoiled, as though acknowledging something ancient and alien, yet not entirely hostile. The light dimmed, and Strange exhaled slowly. The connection had drained him, but it had also revealed much. Through the brief contact, he had seen the Emperor, a withered god-king bound to his throne. His body decayed, yet his mind burning brighter than 1,000 suns. The sheer psychic presence was staggering, a being of such immense power that even Dormammu would have hesitated to challenge him within his domain. Yet what disturbed Strange most was the sorrow he sensed beneath that radiance, a burden of eternal sacrifice, a consciousness trapped between divinity and decay. He understood now that the Emperor's psychic field wasn't just power. It was a barrier, holding back the horrors of the warp and sustaining the fragile remnants of human civilization. Merithiel, shaken but composed, approached him cautiously. "You have seen him," she said softly. "You understand now why the Imperium cannot tolerate your kind. Every unsanctioned power risks drawing the gaze of the warp's masters." Strange nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Your Emperor is extraordinary," he admitted. But he's not unlike those I've encountered before. Beings who carry the weight of countless souls and the madness that follows. His light shields you, yes, but it also binds you. You live in a cage of faith, blind to what lies beyond. Merithiel's eyes narrowed, anger flickering for an instant. "A faith is what keeps us alive," she replied sharply. "Without the Emperor, humanity would drown in the warp's corruption." Strange didn't argue. He could see the conviction burning in her heart, a conviction shared by billions, but he also saw the danger in such absolute belief. Power, when worshipped, became tyranny. The Emperor's dominion was not only psychic but spiritual, shaping the minds of his followers into instruments of obedience. Strange understood the necessity of control. He himself was the guardian of balance, but the fanaticism here bordered on self-destruction. As he pondered, he felt another pulse through the warp, a dark echo rippling beneath the Emperor's light. Something vast and cunning was watching from the shadows, its laughter echoing faintly through the immaterium. The Emperor's psychic barrier flared, and for an instant, Strange glimpsed a face within the warp, ever-changing, eyes like burning sigils, a mind of infinite scheme. He didn't know the name, but the energy was unmistakable. This was the presence of Tzeentch, the architect of fate, god of sorcery and manipulation. The realization struck him hard. The warp wasn't just a chaotic plane. It was alive, sentient, and endlessly hungry. Every psychic act, every prayer, every spell fed it in some way. The Emperor fought it not through destruction but through containment, waging a war of will that spanned millennia. Strange could barely comprehend the endurance required to maintain such dominance. Yet he also sensed that even the Emperor's control was not absolute. Cracks existed, faint but real, where the darkness seeped through. Tense and the other Chaos gods were always watching, waiting for weakness. Strange understood that his own arrival, his unfamiliar magic, might have already attracted their attention. Merithiel noticed his distant gaze and demanded to know what he had seen. Strange chose his words carefully. "He's something beyond your Emperor's reach," he said quietly. "A mind that moves through the warp like smoke, bending destiny to its will. If your Emperor is the beacon, then this presence is the storm that hungers to extinguish it." Her expression hardened. "Then you understand why we cannot allow you to roam free. You are a breach waiting to happen." Strange looked at her steadily. "Or perhaps a bridge, one that might help you understand what you truly fight." The chamber fell silent, the tension palpable. Strange knew he stood between two worlds now, his own disciplined mysticism and the Imperium's rigid psychic doctrine. The Emperor's power had tested him, measured him, and perhaps even acknowledged him. But the conflict between their philosophies was inevitable. Strange's magic thrived on freedom and understanding, while the Imperium's power was built on obedience and faith. In a galaxy consumed by war and chaos, such opposing forces could not coexist peacefully for long, and the first sparks of that collision had already begun to ignite. The warp stretched endlessly before him, a kaleidoscope of madness and wonder that defied all mortal comprehension. Dr. Strange stood suspended in the void, his form flickering between realities as he gazed into the infinite currents of psychic energy that formed this nightmarish dimension. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The astral plane, the dark dimension, even the fractured timelines of alternate universes, all of them obeyed some measure of cosmic law. But the warp was pure chaos incarnate, an ocean of thought and emotion where reality itself bent to the will of consciousness. Every fear, every dream, every act of devotion from the mortal realm bled into this place, shaping it, twisting it, feeding it. Strange could feel it pulsing with malignant life, its heartbeat synchronized with the madness of countless minds across the galaxy. The Inquisitor's words still echoed in his thoughts. To truly understand the Emperor's struggle, one had to see what he fought against. Strange had entered the warp, not by choice but through a psychic convergence, an accident of his attempt to trace the Emperor's psychic domain. The instant he crossed the threshold, the laws of existence unraveled. His spells flickered like dying embers, his protective wards strained against the unrelenting tide of psychic energy. There was no up or down, no light or shadow, only shifting hues of emotion given shape. Rage as crimson storms, despair as black oceans, hope as fleeting silver sparks that vanished as soon as they appeared. The warp was alive, whispering, laughing, screaming. It called his name in 1,000 voices, some pleading, some mocking. Strange wrapped himself in a cocoon of mystic light, drawing upon the power of the Vishanti to maintain coherence. Yet even they felt distant here, their influence muted by the alien laws of this realm. He drifted through the chaotic expanse, observing as fragments of reality floated past him. Broken memories, dying prayers, the psychic residue of souls lost to the warp's hung. He saw a soldier's final thought crystallized in the air before dissolving into mist, a planet's collective terror as it burned. A child's hope that flickered for a moment before being devoured by shadow. Every psychic death, every act of faith, every burst of emotion found its reflection here, forming the eternal storm that defined the warp's essence. As he delved deeper, Strange began to sense patterns within the madness. The warp was chaotic, yes, but not without purpose. Like a great sea, it moved in unseen tides, drawn by powers older than stars. The first of these presences made itself known to him as a whisper, a soft, almost seductive voice curling through the void. "You do not belong here, sorcerer," it said, the tone neither welcoming nor hostile, but curious. Strange turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw a shifting mass of light and color coalescing before him. It took no fixed shape. Every time he tried to focus on it, it changed. Feathers became fire, eyes became stars, mouths became laughter. The being exuded intelligence, its every thought reshaping the space around them. Strange recognized it instantly. "A Tzeentch," he murmured, "the architect of fate." The entity laughed, the sound echoing through dimensions. "Names are such fragile things," it said. You are a stranger, a dream misplaced in the tides of destiny. How curious that your magic burns differently than the warp, so ordered, so restrained. Do you not wish to know what true power feels like, unbound by structure or law?" Strange floated still, his aura flaring defensively. He had faced cosmic deceivers before, and he knew that every word from such a being was a trap. "I know what power without discipline becomes," he replied evenly. "The poison that devours its wielder." Touch's laughter rippled through the void like a storm. "Yet you hold it back as if it were your duty to cage creation itself. Tell me, mortal, when your order collapses, as all orders must, what will your restraint buy you? The warp is the truth that your reality hides from itself. Here will shapes worlds and thought gives birth to gods. Even your emperor is but a reflection of belief. What separates him from the rest of us?" Strange said nothing, though his mind raced. The idea that the emperor was sustained by faith and psychic projection mirrored something he had sensed during his contact with the imperial relic. In this place, belief was not abstract. It was energy. Worship itself had weight. Every prayer to the emperor strengthened him just as every heretical thought fed the chaos gods. It was a cycle without end, a war of will and faith that spanned eternity. Voyager drifted closer, the air rippling with impossible colors. "You could change it," the entity whispered. "You who stand outside destiny's web. Your magic is a language I have never heard, a symphony that does not belong to this reality. Imagine what you could accomplish here, unshackled by fear or the Emperor's tyranny. You could remake this galaxy. All you need do is open yourself to the warp." Strange's eyes hardened. "I've heard such promises before, from beings who believe themselves gods." His voice was quiet but unyielding. "A power without purpose is corruption, and whatever you are, thrive on corruption." The god's laughter grew louder, shaking the void. "Perhaps," it said, "but corruption is only another word for change, and change is inevitable." The being dissolved into motes of light, its presence lingering in the form of countless whispers that echoed in Strange's mind. He knew it wasn't gone. Entities like Tzeentch never truly left. They lingered, watching, weaving. He focused his energy inward, centering his mind with ancient mantras to silence the psychic noise. The warp responded violently, as though resisting his attempts at order. The currents surged around him, forming monstrous faces and clawed hands that tried to pull him apart. Strange summoned the shield of the seraphim, its radiant geometry cutting through the chaos like a blade of reason. Slowly, the storm calmed, retreating into the endless horizon. As silence fell, Strange found himself drifting before a strange construct, an island of stability in the warp's endless flux. It was formed of psychic crystal, glowing faintly with golden light. He realized with awe that this was the Emperor's psychic beacon, the Astronomicon, its radiance piercing through the madness to guide humanity's ships across the stars. To see it from within the warp was humbling. The structure thrummed with divine power, maintained by the Emperor's will and the sacrifice of countless psychers each day. Strange bowed his head slightly, acknowledging the impossible task this being undertook. The Emperor was not merely a ruler but a warden, holding back the abyss by sheer will. He reached out, and for an instant their energies touched again, his mystic light interwoven with the Emperor's golden flame. Strange saw visions, the birth of the Imperium, the fall of Horus, the eternal agony of a god-man chained to his throne. He withdrew, shaken. The warp's whispers returned, laughing, crying, chanting his name. Somewhere in that infinite storm, Tsinxi's voice lingered. You cannot unsee the truth now, sorcerer. You are part of the game. Strange turned away from the light and began his ascent, his thoughts heavy with revelation. The warp was not just an enemy, it was the soul of this universe, and now it knew him. The warp churned like a storm-tossed sea, the luminous rivers of psychic energy twisting and coiling in endless motion as Dr. Strange floated within its depths, anchored only by his will and the faint glow of his protective wards. Every moment in this place tested his resolve. The constant psychic pressure gnawed at his mind, whispering temptations and terrors in equal measure. But amid the chaos, one presence began to rise above the noise, a consciousness vast, ancient, and cunning. Strange had felt it before, in the shifting shadows of the warp's many voices. Now it was approaching him directly, the very fabric of reality folding around its coming. The storm stilled, and in the sudden silence the architect of fate revealed himself. Strange's form was beyond comprehension. A swirling entity of colors that didn't exist in any sane spectrum, his body composed of symbols that shifted and reformed faster than human eyes could follow. His laughter echoed in geometric waves, each sound forming impossible shapes in the air. Strange stood firm, his aura burning bright against the encroaching madness. You again, he said evenly, his tone carrying both weariness and defiance. The god's laughter softened into a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Or did you think you could wander my domain unseen, Sorcerer Supreme? Every ripple you make, every thought you think, reshapes the threads of destiny. I am the loom upon which those threads are spun. Strange tightened his grip on his staff, his eyes glowing faintly with mystic light. If you are the weaver, then you've tangled your own creation into a knot, he replied. This realm is nothing but suffering and contradiction. Tsinxi's form shifted, one half of his face smiling, the other frowning. The suffering is the cost of progress, he murmured. A contradiction is the seed of transformation. You, of all beings, should understand that. You have changed yourself 1,000 times, Dr. Sorcerer Guardian Fool. Every change brought pain, and every pain brought power. That is my domain. You and I are not so different. The words hung in the air, heavy with temptation. Strange could feel the warp reacting, its colors pulsing in rhythm with the god's voice. He could sense Tsinxi's power weaving around him like a net, trying to ensnare his thoughts, to draw him into the eternal dance of manipulation. He had faced beings of deception before, but never one whose lies were truth and whose truth was deception. The architect of fate moved closer, his massive form towering above Strange, feathers turning to fire and eyes blinking open across his wings. You cling to order, he said softly, to rules, to the illusion that you can control chaos. Yet here you stand in my realm, wielding chaos itself to survive. Why fight what you already are? Strange inhaled deeply, his mind steady. Because control is what separates knowledge from madness, he said. Without it, power destroys everything it touches, including the one who wields it. Tsinxi laughed again, and the sound sent ripples through the void. And yet, your emperor would call you heretic for such control. His order is not freedom, but stagnation. His light blinds his children so they cannot see beyond his cage. I offer you the opposite. I offer you the freedom to shape destiny itself, to see the paths untold and rewrite them. As he spoke, visions unfolded around them, worlds burning and reborn, stars collapsing into singularities, armies kneeling before a figure in crimson and gold who bore Strange's own likeness. The god's voice became a whisper that slithered through his mind. You could end this eternal war. You could unmake chaos and rebuild the warp into harmony. All you must do is embrace it. Strange felt the pull immediately. The offer was seductive, intoxicating. For an instant, he saw what it would be like to command the warp, to bring balance to this galaxy of endless conflict. He could heal what had been broken, end the suffering that consumed billions. Yet even as the thought formed, he saw the corruption behind it. Power offered by deceit was never a gift. It was a leash. He raised his hand and golden sigils of protection flared around him, pushing back Tsinxi's influence. Your promises are empty, he said quietly. Every word you speak is a trap. Tente's laughter faltered for a moment, and the god's tone darkened. Or perhaps, he said, his voice deepening into something that resonated like thunder. But traps exist because beings like you can resist curiosity. Tell me, Stephen Strange, why do you fight for order in a universe that rejects it? And rejects it. What do you gain from denying the truth that all things change, all things decay, and all things return to me? Strange met the god's many eyes without flinching. Because someone has to, he said simply. If no one resists, then everything collapses into chaos. Balance must be fought for even when it's impossible. The air between them shimmered violently, the collision of their wills shaking the warp itself. Strange raised his staff, channeling mystic energy into a sphere of pure light, a symbol of ordered creation. Thiesench's laughter returned louder, this time almost delighted. Then show me, sorcerer, show me your balance. The god unleashed a storm of psychic energy, and the warp roared to life. Waves of corruption and color surged towards Strange, twisting into monstrous forms. Faces that screamed, wings that clawed, tendrils of thought made flesh. Strange countered with disciplined precision, weaving spells that deflected and unraveled the chaos around him. His shields flickered as the god's power intensified, each strike a test of will rather than strength. The battle was not physical. It was a clash of philosophies. Tente that sought to overwhelm him with infinite possibility, to drown him in visions of what could be. Strange countered with focus and clarity, grounding himself in the reality of what is. He chanted mantras of containment, shaping the chaotic energy into patterns of light. The god shrieked in amusement as Strange managed to carve a sphere of stability within the warp, a momentary island of order amid the storm. Impressive. Thiesench's form rippling. But every order you create is just another step toward entropy. Even now, your magic feeds the cycle. Strange's aura flared brighter. Then I'll keep rebuilding it, he said through gritted teeth. Again and again, as long as I must. With a final surge, he released a burst of pure light that ripped through the warp, scattering Thiesench's form into 1,000 fragments. The echoes of the god's laughter lingered, both mocking and approving. We will meet again, sorcerer. You cannot fight change forever. The light faded, and the warp grew silent once more. Strange stood alone, his breath heavy, his power nearly drained. He had survived the architect of fate, but he knew this was only the beginning. Even now your defiance fuels my power. Strange gritted his teeth, realizing that fighting in this realm was feeding the very being he opposed. Violence was Khorne's language, and to engage him on his terms was to lose. He needed to change the rules. Closing his eyes for a moment, he let his consciousness expand outward, feeling the rhythm of the realm, the pulse of anger that tied everything together. It was chaotic but patterned, like the heartbeat of a dying star. He began to shape his magic differently, not as an attack, but as transformation. The energy he released turned the air around him still, silencing the cries of the demons, freezing their movements in suspended time. Khorne roared, his power flaring as he shattered the spell with a single thought. A tricks, he spat. Always tricks. Fight me as a warrior, not as a coward. Strange's eyes opened, glowing with cosmic light. No, he said simply, because fighting you is what you want, and I won't feed your madness. He lifted his hand, and the field around him shimmered as layers of reality folded in on themselves. Sigils of containment, ancient and intricate, wove themselves into the blood-soaked ground. The demons screamed as they were pulled back into the warp, their forms unraveling. Khorne struck forward, swinging a massive axe forged from the skulls of champions. The blow tore through space itself, shattering Strange's first barrier and sending him tumbling across the crimson plain. The impact burned through his wards, blood trickling from his lip. The god loomed above him, voice shaking the realm. No magic will save you, sorcerer. No words, no light, only blood. But Strange was already rising, his aura expanding once more. He could feel the anger pressing against his mind, the seductive pull of rage whispering that maybe, just maybe, he should give in, fight fire with fire, but he refused. He summoned the Eye of Agamotto, its green light cutting through the crimson haze. The artifact pulsed with time's rhythm, with balance and memory. Strange focused all his energy into it, channeling not destruction but restoration. The light spread outward, burning away the blood mist, freezing the rivers for an instant. For the first time, Khorne hesitated. The god's laughter stopped as the ground beneath his throne cracked, revealing not more blood but emptiness. "What is this?" Khorne demanded. Strange's voice was quiet, steady, and filled with iron will. A balance, he said. You feed on endless war, but even war cannot exist without the space between battles. Without pause, without reflection, even rage loses meaning. The energy from the eye intensified, weaving a boundary between their powers. Khorne struck again, but his blow met resistance not from magic, but from a fundamental truth that transcended both of them, the necessity of equilibrium. The god bellowed in fury as his power was repelled, the battlefield dissolving into shadow. This is not over, sorcerer. Khorne roared as his form disintegrated into the warp, his voice fading into distant thunder. When the storm cleared, Strange stood alone once more, his breath shallow but his resolve stronger than ever. He had not defeated Khorne. No one could truly defeat a chaos god, but he had denied him the victory he craved. And in the silence that followed, the warp itself seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging that the Sorcerer Supreme had once again defied its endless hunger for violence. Dr. Strange drifted through the warp like a fragment of light adrift in a sea of darkness, his mind exhausted yet unwavering. He had faced deceit incarnate in Simian, survived the pure fury of Khorne, but the warp was not finished testing him. As he moved through the psychic currents, the energy around him began to shift again, no longer violent or chaotic, but heavy, suffocating, and reeking of decay. The very air felt diseased, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that echoed like the breath of a dying god. He knew before he saw it that this was the domain of Nurgle, the Lord of Decay, the Plague Father whose joy lay in corruption and entropy. The colors of the warp darkened into shades of sickly green and yellow, the ground beneath him transforming into rotting flesh that squirmed with life. Each step he took left behind a trail of blackened ooze. The smell of death was everywhere, yet beneath it, there was something disturbingly comforting, like the warmth of an embrace that would never let go. From the horizon, an enormous figure emerged, his form both monstrous and strangely paternal. Nurgle's vast belly shook with laughter as flies the size of planets swarmed around him. His skin sagged and split in countless places, each wound birthing new horrors, tiny demons, maggots, and crawling things that sang in voices that were almost cheerful. "Little visitor," Nurgle said, his tone warm and strangely inviting. "How delightful. It's been so long since someone new wandered my garden. Come closer, my child. You look so tired, so burdened by your fight. Let me ease your suffering." His words flowed like honey, sweet and deceptive, wrapping around Strange's mind with the false comfort of acceptance. Strange hovered in the air, his aura glowing softly against the gloom. "I know who you are," he said calmly, "and I know what your gifts cost." Nurgle chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that made the ground quake. "A cost? Oh, such a sad word. Everything decays, everything ends. I merely help things find peace in their inevitable state. Why resist what must be? Look around you, sorcerer. Life and death are not opposites. They are one and the same. Decay feeds growth. Death births new life. You of all beings who have seen countless realities should understand the beauty in that." Strange's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the grotesque landscape. Everywhere he looked, things bloomed and rotted in the same moment. Flowers of flesh that grew from corpses, rivers of bile that birthed shimmering spores. It was a horrifying cycle, yet disturbingly natural. "There's no beauty in suffering," he said. "You take the inevitable and twist it into indulgence." Nurgle's grin widened, revealing teeth like tombstones. "Ha ha ha! But suffering gives meaning. The joy of endurance, the relief of surrender. I offer love where your Imperium offers only pain. Even the mortals who worship me smile as they rot, because they have accepted the truth that all struggle ends here, in my embrace. Tell me, sorcerer, after all you've endured, wouldn't you like to stop fighting? Wouldn't you like to rest?" The voice was almost tender, and for a fleeting moment, Strange felt the exhaustion in his bones. The constant battle, the endless struggle to maintain order against chaos, it weighed on him like chains. He could feel the temptation, the allure of letting go. Just to stop resisting, to stop fighting, to allow the decay to take him and dissolve his burdens into nothingness. But deep within his soul, something resisted. He knew that surrender here wasn't peace. It was oblivion disguised as mercy. He straightened, the light of his aura growing brighter. "A rest is earned through harmony," he said quietly, "not through corruption." Nurgle sighed, sounding almost disappointed. "Ah, the stubbornness of the living, always clinging to illusions of purity, of control. You can't fight decay, my dear boy. Even the stars will rot in time. Even your precious order will crumble into dust. Why fight the inevitable when you could join it? As he spoke, the ground beneath Strange began to shift, tendrils of rotting vines reaching upward, trying to ensnare him. Strange lifted his hands, conjuring sigils of cleansing energy. Golden light flared, burning through the vines, but as soon as one disintegrated, another grew in its place. He realized that this was not a battle he could win by destruction. Nurgle's power thrived on persistence. Every attempt to purge only fed the cycle. He closed his eyes, changing his approach. He stopped fighting against the corruption and instead began to channel energy not of rejection, but of balance. The golden light softened, merging with shades of green, transforming into an aura of renewal rather than eradication. The vines around him stopped attacking and began to bloom into pure, untainted growth, green leaves untouched by rot, light shining through the decay. Nurgle watched, his expression unreadable. "Interesting," the god murmured. "You would not destroy but heal. You would not destroy but heal. You would bring renewal to what has accepted its end. You truly are a strange one." Strange met his gaze, his voice calm but unwavering. "A decay is part of life, yes, but when you make it eternal, you steal the purpose of both. Without the chance to grow anew, there is no life, only stagnation." Nurgle's laughter shook the air, though there was no cruelty in it, only amusement. "You speak like a gardener trying to prune a universe that's already rotted to its roots. Still, I see your point. Perhaps there's room in my garden for something different." He waved one massive hand and the air shimmered. The demons that had been watching stepped back and the sea of rot around them momentarily stilled. "A go then, sorcerer," he said, his tone almost kind. "But remember, when your light fades, when your hope dies, my garden will still be waiting. Everything returns to me in time." Strange inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the twisted wisdom hidden in the words. He floated higher, the purifying light around him pushing back the miasma as he ascended. Behind him, Nurgle's laughter followed like a lullaby for the dead, soft and patient. The Garden of Decay faded into mist, replaced once more by the shifting tides of the warp. Strange could still feel the presence of Nurgle lingering at the edges of his mind, not as a threat but as a reminder. He understood now that decay was not merely destruction, it was transformation. But the Plague Father's lesson carried danger, for it offered comfort in surrender. Strange had resisted, but he knew the temptation would linger. The warp did not just test strength, it tested conviction. And as he drifted onward through its ever-changing void, he could feel the eyes of other gods waiting, their curiosity piqued by this mortal who refused to break. The warp twisted once more around Dr. Strange, its colors darkening into shades of violet and crimson, shimmering with an unnatural allure that seemed to pulse in rhythm with a heartbeat he could not locate. After enduring the cunning of Tzinch, the rage of Khorne, and the decay of Nurgle, Strange had thought himself prepared for whatever might come next. But as the warp's endless expanse began to shimmer like silk under a dark moon, he felt a new sensation creeping into his mind. Pleasure, desire, and temptation, all intertwined with something far more insidious. The air itself seemed to breathe against his skin, warm and intoxicating. He had entered the domain of Slaanesh, the prince of excess, the god of pleasure, perfection, and torment. The landscape before him was unlike the others. It was breathtakingly beautiful, filled with impossible architecture that shimmered like diamond under violet skies. Rivers of liquid light flowed through fields of crystal flowers, and the air hummed with faint music that seemed to echo from within his own mind. But beneath the beauty, there was a tension, an unseen hunger that made every breath feel dangerous. A voice, smooth and melodic, drifted from the distance, wrapping around him like silk. "Ah, the Sorcerer Supreme himself," it whispered. "How wonderful! You've wandered through rage, decay, and deceit, and yet you still stand. Tell me, what is it that drives you, Stephen Strange? Is it duty, guilt, or is it pride?" The figure emerged from the haze. Tall, elegant, neither male nor female, yet somehow both. Their eyes shimmered like starlight reflected in liquid gold, and every movement was perfection itself. Strange felt his pulse quicken despite his discipline. Even the sound of Slaanesh's voice carried a strange pleasure that resonated through his very soul. "You faced so much suffering," the god continued, circling him like a predator that wore beauty as armor. "But wouldn't you like to feel something else? Not pain, not fear. Just pure sensation, untainted by guilt or restraint." Strange closed his eyes for a moment, forcing his breath to steady. "I've felt temptation before," he said evenly. You're not the first to offer me what I already possess. Control. Slaanesh laughed, a sound so harmonious it was almost divine. Control. Oh no, my dear sorcerer, control is an illusion. You of all people should know that. You wield power you barely comprehend. You dance on the edge of madness every time you touch the mystic currents, and yet you call it control? No, what you have is denial. You restrain yourself because you fear what you could become if you did. The god's words slid into his thoughts like blades coated in honey. Around them, the environment began to shift, the crystalline fields morphing into images from Strange's own memories. He saw himself in Camartage, studying endlessly, sacrificing his own happiness for mastery. He saw Christine Palmer, her face soft with pity as he pushed her away for the sake of duty. He saw the countless lives he had saved, and the countless he had failed to. You claim you serve balance, Slaanesh whispered, their voice now intimate, close enough that he could feel the vibration of it against his ear. But deep down you crave recognition. You crave perfection. You crave to be the best, to be admired, worshipped, loved. You and I are not so different, Stephen. Strange felt the weight of the words press against his mind like velvet chains. It wasn't rage or fear that threatened to consume him this time. It was longing. The seductive promise of release, of finally letting go of the endless restraint he held over himself. His cloak rippled slightly, reacting to the danger it sensed. He opened his eyes and met Slaanesh's gaze directly. You mistake purpose for pride, he said quietly. I don't seek worship. I seek understanding. The god's smile deepened, impossibly alluring. Understanding is just another form of control. You chased knowledge because you wanted to define everything, to place boundaries where there should be none. Why not simply feel? The air shimmered, and the music grew louder. Strange could feel his senses beginning to blur, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the atmosphere. Every color was too vivid, every sound too pure. He felt his heartbeat echoing through the warp itself, synchronized with the rhythm of the god's voice. He tried to focus, to anchor himself, but even his spells faltered as the energy of this realm fed on sensation rather than logic. For a moment, he felt himself slipping, his aura flickering as Slaanesh stepped closer, their fingers brushing against his face like a whisper. Lu can give you peace, the god murmured, not the empty peace of death or discipline, but the eternal ecstasy of perfect existence. Imagine it, your mind free of conflict, your soul in harmony with every pulse of the cosmos. You could feel everything at once, forever. The temptation was overwhelming, but within the storm of pleasure, Strange found his center. He had faced the seduction of power before, in Caecilius, in Dormammu, in the very magic that once healed his broken hands. He knew the pattern. Temptation always disguised itself as freedom, but it was only another kind of bondage. He drew a deep breath and whispered an incantation, summoning the light of the Vishanti. Golden runes appeared around him, spinning faster until they formed a radiant sphere that pushed back the illusions. The beauty of the realm began to crack, revealing what lay beneath. The tortured souls who had surrendered to Slaanesh's will, their forms twisted in eternal ecstasy that was indistinguishable from agony. The music turned discordant, the perfection dissolving into chaos. Slaanesh's expression changed, still beautiful, but now filled with cold disappointment. Such a shame, they said softly. You could have transcended your limits. You could have become divine. Strange's voice remained calm, even as his spell strained to hold back the corruption around him. A divinity without will is slavery, he said, and pleasure without restraint is just another form of pain. The god's smile returned, faint and knowing, perhaps. But remember, sorcerer, every wall you build against desire only makes it strong. You can't silence the hunger inside you. You can only starve it, and hunger always returns. The warp trembled as Slaanesh's form dissolved into the shimmering mist once more, leaving behind only the echo of their laughter, beautiful and haunting. The illusion faded completely, and Strange found himself floating in silence once again. The world around him was neither beautiful nor grotesque, just empty. He could still feel the lingering ache of the god's influence, a whisper in the back of his mind reminding him of everything he had denied himself. But he remained steady, his will unbroken. He understood now that every encounter with the Chaos Gods was not just a battle of power, but a philosophy, of temptation. Each one represented a fragment of truth twisted into corruption. And though Slaanesh's words would linger, he knew that surrender, no matter how sweet, was the first step toward oblivion. The warp was quieter now. Though the silence was deceptive, a calm before the next wave of chaos that always came. Dr. Strange drifted through the void, his body glowing faintly with the remnants of protective spells, his mind a battlefield of conflicting emotion. He had faced all 4 chaos gods and survived their trials, each encounter leaving an imprint, each lesson reshaping his understanding of this fractured reality. Yet something felt different now. The warp, ever turbulent and alive, began to settle into something almost cohesive, its madness weaving itself into a strange kind of order. Strange could sense it, a consciousness vast beyond measure, neither purely benevolent nor malicious, a presence that dwarfed even the chaos gods themselves. It was not born of emotion or hunger, but of purpose. He had entered the attention of the Emperor of mankind. The light emerged from the void gradually, at first just a flicker, then a blinding radiance that stretched across eternity. Strange shielded his eyes with a hand. Though the light was not physical, it was truth itself, raw and absolute. The warp around him dissolved, reshaping into a golden plane that seemed to stretch without end. In the distance stood a figure of impossible grandeur, radiant with divine fire, clad in armor that shimmered with the energy of 1,000 suns. The Emperor's gaze pierced him before a single word was spoken. There was no hostility in it, but there was no mercy either, only the weight of infinite responsibility. "You do not belong here," the voice said, echoing through Strange's mind rather than his ears. "Yet you walk through my realm, through the shadows that haunt my children. Why have you come?" Strange took a slow breath, his aura pulsing with disciplined calm. "Because your realm touches others," he said. "The warp is not just your burden. It threatens every world, every dimension. I came to understand it, to see if it can be tamed, if it can be healed." The Emperor regarded him silently, and for a moment, Strange felt like a child standing before the judgment of a god. The air hummed with restrained power. "The warp cannot be healed," the Emperor said finally. "It is not a wound. It is the reflection of all that lives." To change it would be to unmake existence itself. His words carried no malice, only truth. Yet Strange could feel the sorrow beneath them, a deep, ancient grief that stretched beyond comprehension. He took a cautious step forward, the ground beneath him rippling like molten gold. "Maybe not healed," Strange said, "but perhaps balanced. You fight to control it through force, through faith and fear. That has power, but not harmony. Order imposed by fear breeds chaos in secret." The Emperor's gaze flared brighter, his expression unreadable. "And what would you know of harmony, sorcerer? You come from a world that toys with power it cannot comprehend. You speak of balance, but even your kind cannot escape corruption. The moment you touched the mystic, you made yourself a part of the cycle you claimed to fight." Strange didn't deny it. Instead, he nodded slightly. "Yes, but that's why I understand it. Chaos isn't destroyed by denial. It's understood, contained, acknowledged for what it is. You've built an empire on the fear of what lies beyond, but fear feeds the warp as much as hate or greed." The Emperor's aura flared, golden lightning crackling across the sky. The sheer force of his presence pressed down on Strange like the weight of a collapsing star. "You dare lecture me on fear?" the Emperor thundered. "I have carried humanity through 10,000 years of darkness. I have sacrificed everything. My body, my soul, my sons for their survival. You speak of understanding, but you have not witnessed the scale of human corruption, the depths to which they will fall without my hand to guide them. I am not their tyrant. I am their shield." Strange's cloak fluttered violently under the psychic wind, but he held his ground. His voice remained calm. "A shield that never lowers becomes a cage. You protect humanity from the truth, but in doing so, you've taught them to fear it. You've made the warp their nightmare when it could be their teacher." The air between them crackled as their wills collided, not in hatred, but in philosophy. Strange's magic shimmered with the light of countless dimensions, while the Emperor's radiance pulsed with the distilled essence of human willpower. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. Around them, visions unfolded of the Imperium's vast cities, its soldiers dying in endless wars, its priests chanting the Emperor's name as both savior and god. Strange saw a civilization built on sacrifice and control, magnificent and tragic all at once. "You see only the surface," the Emperor said, his voice quieter now. "You see oppression where there is unity, fanaticism where there is faith. Humanity is not ready for the truths you speak of. The warp does not forgive idealists. It devours them. Strange met his gaze without flinching. Meaning, and yet you dream of something more, he said softly. I can feel it. Even now, beneath all this power, all this control, you still hope that one day humanity will outgrow the need for you. You want them to stand without you. For a fraction of a second, the Emperor's light dimmed, and Strange sensed the faintest hint of sorrow. Hope, the Emperor murmured, is the most dangerous form of faith. His gaze turned distant, as if looking across millennia of suffering. I once believed as you do. I thought reason could guide them, that knowledge would save them. But mortals crave meaning more than truth, and in their craving they gave birth to gods like the ones you faced. They made monsters of their own desires. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Strange slowly lowered his staff, his aura dimming. Then maybe the answer isn't to destroy the gods, he said quietly, but to teach mortals to stop feeding them. The Emperor's eyes flared again, the golden fire blazing with renewed intensity. You speak as if it were that simple, he said, but there was no anger in his tone now, only weary admiration. You are a fool, sorcerer, but perhaps a necessary. The galaxy could use more who dream of balance, even if they will burn trying to reach it. The light around him began to fade, his immense form dissolving into pure radiance. Go, Stephen Strange. Return to your realm. You have walked among gods and refused to kneel. That is strength enough. Enough. The warp around Strange began to dissolve, the golden light receding into the infinite void. He felt himself being drawn back toward the material plane, the echo of the Emperor's presence lingering in his mind, like the tolling of a distant bell. There was no victory to claim here, no grand revelation that could end the eternal war. But as he drifted through the collapsing light, he understood something deeper, that in every universe, no matter how grim, the struggle for balance was the same. Power and faith, order and chaos, light and shadow, all forever entwined. And though he had touched the heart of this universe's greatest power, Strange knew that the true battle was not fought in the warp or in heaven, but within the souls of those who dared to hope. Dr. Strange stood once again upon the fractured horizon of the warp, the echoes of his encounter with the Emperor fading into memory. The endless tides of madness and emotion rolled around him, alive with the whispers of gods, mortals, and dreams. The multiverse shimmered faintly beyond the veil, calling him back. He could sense the familiar vibration of his own universe, the resonance of his sanctum, the heartbeat of his earth, the countless worlds he had sworn to protect. Yet he lingered for a moment longer, his mind absorbing everything he had seen and felt within this brutal, magnificent realm. The warp had not broken him. It had remade him, tempered him like a blade in fire. He had seen how faith could be both poison and salvation, how power could both preserve and destroy, and how even the mightiest beings were prisoners of their own purpose. Around him, the warp shifted restlessly, its storms curling into spirals of violet flame and starlit shadows. Shadows. The echoes of the chaos gods whispered faintly. Temptations, mockery, and strangely, a kind of respect. Tzinch's laughter coiled through the void, playful and cruel. So the sorcerer leaves unchanged? It asked. No, Strange murmured, his voice calm, steady, as he summoned the eye of Agamotto, its emerald light cutting through the swirling mists. Not unchanged, just unbroken. The laughter faded into 1,000 echoes, swallowed by the warp's currents. Strange could feel the raw fabric of this universe pressing against his soul, chaotic yet vibrant, filled with both destruction and creation. He understood now that the warp wasn't purely evil, it was the reflection of sentient thought, the mirror of life itself. The Imperium's fear had chained it, but that same fear had also kept it alive. Without it, the warp would be nothing, and nothingness was far more terrifying. He raised his hand and began to trace a sigil in the air, ancient and intricate, one that would bridge the realms. Golden light spilled from his fingers, merging with the currents of the warp. It fought him, resisted him, then slowly yielded, not through domination, but through understanding. He wasn't trying to control it. He was communicating with it, harmonizing with the endless storm rather than commanding it. Threads of energy converged around him, weaving a circle of balance, a fragile piece within chaos. For a brief moment, the warp itself seemed to quiet, as if curious, listening. Strange smiled faintly beneath his breath. That's all it takes, he whispered, a little understanding. But the stillness didn't last. The shadows quivered and the warp roared again, as if laughing at the very idea of peace. A million distorted faces swirled around him, the cries of the damned, the dreams of gods. He could feel the immense pull of the multiverse demanding his return. The energy surged, threatening to tear his form apart. Yet Strange held firm, his cloak flaring outward like a living flame. His thoughts drifted to the Emperor, the immortal ruler chained to his golden throne, keeping the galaxy alive at the cost of his own soul. For all his power, the Emperor was as much a prisoner as any mortal. Strange wondered if the man had chosen that fate willingly or if it had simply become inevitable. In his own universe, Strange too had made sacrifices. Time, love, normalcy, all for the sake of protecting realities that could never truly thank him. In that sense, he understood the Emperor more deeply than he cared to admit. The warp's pressure intensified and visions assaulted him. Worlds burning, demons devouring entire star systems, the Imperium tearing itself apart under the weight of its own fate. Yet among the chaos, Strange also glimpsed something else. Tiny sparks of light scattered across the galaxy. Acts of compassion, courage, and defiance. A lone guardsman shielding his comrade, a sister of battle tending to the wounded, a child whispering a prayer not out of fear but out of hope. The warp reflected these too. They were faint, fragile, almost lost in the storm, but they were there. Strange realized that these flickers of light were what truly kept this universe alive. Not the Emperor's divine will, not the armies of gods, but the small, stubborn goodness of ordinary beings who refused to surrender to despair. He tightened his grip on his staff, channeling the energy around him. "That's your secret, isn't it?" he murmured to the warp itself. "You're not just chaos. You're potential." The energy surged in response, as if acknowledging his words. A portal began to form before him, a swirling aperture of golden light that connected to his home dimension. He took a slow breath and stepped closer. Behind him, the warp howled, alive and eternal. The laughter of the gods echoed once more, mocking yet almost admiring. Korn's growl rumbled like thunder. "You fight without fear. A pity you don't fight for us." Slaanish's voice whispered silkily through the air. "You'd have made a beautiful ruin." Nurgle chuckled, heavy and warm. "Even purity rots, little mage. You'll see." And finally, Tizek spoke again, its tone one of sly amusement. "We'll meet again. Strange. No one leaves the warp untouched." Strange turned slightly, his expression unreadable. Perhaps," he said softly. But not today." He stepped into the light, and the warp folded in on itself behind him, collapsing like a dying star. The transition was violent. A storm of colors, screams, and light, but then it was gone. Silence. He opened his eyes and found himself standing once more in the Sanctum Sanctorum. The familiar hum of his universe washed over him like a breath of fresh air. Time had flowed differently there. Perhaps only minutes had passed, or perhaps centuries. It didn't matter. He had returned. The relics around him glowed faintly, reacting to the immense energy still clinging to his aura. He moved toward the window, gazing out over the city. The lights below sparkled like constellations, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a strange sense of peace. Yet his thoughts remained on that distant galaxy, a realm of eternal war, faith, and fire. He could feel its echo lingering within him, the mark of the warp now intertwined with his own magic. He knew it hadn't let him go entirely. The warp never truly released what it touched. But perhaps that was the point. The lesson was not to avoid the darkness, but to understand it, to walk through it without losing oneself. Strange closed his eyes, feeling the faint pulse of the multiverse once more. There would always be more battles, more universes in need, more chaos to face. But he carried with him a truth born in the heart of the most brutal realm imaginable, that even in the darkest galaxy, light could survive, not by destroying the darkness, but by daring to exist within it.